Mr. Sprânceană, today is 18th of October. We are some 2 weeks away from after the Moldovan parliamentary elections. These were elections which were said to be the most important, the most strategic, with the highest stakes, and Moldovans voted correctly on them. They voted Europe. Um, there is a clear majority for PAS, the ruling party, which is pro-European, as they say. So I want let us first start the discussion with what follows now. How do you appreciate the results, and what follows now that Moldovans have voted the right side, have voted Europe, and what has changed?
Hi. I don't know even how to start and how to how to put it, how to kind of characterize the situation without being or sounding too cynical or too, I don't know, distant in a way. Because on the one hand, what we can say that it's basically the result of these elections are the main result is the preservation of the status quo. So basically, PAS succeeded to keep the grip on the governance. They will govern for the next 4 years. It was not expected, I would say. Like it was expected that they would be the party that would take the majority of votes, but I would say that the result and the fact that they have gotten majority is to a large extent unexpected because there were some discussions, signals. Of course, polls are not very much to be trusted in Moldova, so it's like the expectations in the wake of the elections was that the expectation was that PAS will get close but will not get this comfortable majority. In the end, they did. Probably there is a lot of things going on behind the curtains. They have succeeded to basically go everywhere in the country to mobilize their electorate, to do some other things. But yeah, so they succeeded to keep the grip on the government. Now I don't think the situation will change dramatically because this was not a mandate of change. PAS was speaking nowhere during this electoral campaign about change. PAS was the party that explicitly said that we're basically keeping the status quo. We want your mandate to be able to continue to do the things that we're doing, to continue the integration, and so on and so forth. So, in this sense, I don't expect that a lot of things will change dramatically. Moreover, it's the same people. PAS did little changes in the team, in the electoral lists. There were some people that were left out, but they brought some media persons just to kind of more recognizable faces. But more or less, the team is the same. So I don't again expect that the same people will generate new ideas. So that would be a very general assessment of the results of the elections. The elections were marked by really a very almost hysteric rhetoric about these elections. PAS was saying if we're voting for other parties, might be the last elections because after that the other parties are not as much as committed to democracy as PAS, which means that basically they might cancel the elections. They were phrased between like as this choice between the absolute good and the absolute bad or absolute evil, and it was a characterization of the result of the elections, or like a tone employed both by the ruling kind of party by PAS, but also by the opposition. The opposition also played very comfortably and felt very comfortably in this game. So, in a way, it was as if there was a plot by the whole political class. At these elections, let's let's put aside all the discussions about social issues and let's focus on politics. In the end, as you mentioned in the opening statement, Moldovans voted in a way correctly. If we follow the rhetoric of PAS, they have saved the country. They have succeeded to save the country. But of course, it's another in my view, it's another instance where, like, basically people were frightened, they were scared, they were mobilized based on fear to vote not the lesser evil, not even to do a kind of rational choice, but to do like this moral choice. While for almost everyone, it's obvious that things will not change. So, like, Moldovans voted for more of the same.
On every Moldovan elections, there is this hegemonic interpretation that elections are geopolitical before anything else. Um, what is happening with the issues which are not geopolitical in this context? I understand there is a lot of fear mongering between the different poles in Moldovan politics, but how much are the peaceful issues or the social issues or the economic issues or even cultural and other issues uh, part of what is discussed, what is at stake in the Moldovan elections?
Yeah, I was calling this geopoliticization. It has more sense and sounds better in Romanian, but I guess it's a good English approximation also. Uh, and when I'm saying that the elections had this geopolitical nuance, mood, or whatever, it's not only the old, let's say, Marxist critique. Um, about, like, basically important issues being substituted, being put aside and not discussed, but also there was something else happening in the last, I would say, 4 years. But of course it was not only during these last 4 years. It's like a process which is very old, the geopoliticization of all other aspects, which means, in my understanding, or in my, let's call it theory or speculation, the fact that all issues are being interpreted through these geopolitical lenses. In another place, I called this geopolitical guillotine, in the sense that all the issues are kind of have to be fit within this. And to give you an example, questions as different as cultural policies, housing policies, economic policies in terms of economic growth, everything is being somehow treated as if it is a geopolitical issue. And this is being done differently. The most usual thing is, like, basically everything is being treated as if it depends on the good relationship with our geopolitical kind of neighbors. So the economy is bad, but if we join EU, everything will improve. How, and like, what will be the concrete mechanism through which, like, rapprochement, or, like, let's Moldova getting closer to EU will improve the economy? It's not clear, but this is like that. Like, when we have an issue, for example, housing policies, yes, but, like, the economy will improve, but it's not improving because Russia is attacking Ukraine and is affecting us. And because of this, let's get closer to the EU. And once we join the EU, people will have more money, and then these issues will be solved. The same with the others, like with the opposition. That is building a very similar picture. They're saying, like, our economic situation is bad because we have neglected our eastern neighbor, and only when we restore good economic relationships with Russia, they will give us cheap gas, we'll get access to the Russian market, and this will change the economics, in the sense that this will provide additional resources and the economy will grow. And they're doing the same. Like, all the issues are being interpreted as if they're directly dependent on the relationship with Russia. So I think what is even, like, in this sense, the elections were not just where a case or an instance where politicians just prefer to talk about other things, but also the reflection of the fact that we don't have a discussion of the economy of the country in economic and political terms. We have it in geopolitical terms. We don't have a discussion of the social policies of the country in policy economic terms. We have it in geopolitical terms, and kind of using geopolitical terms for explaining everything. That's, I think, is the real kind of distortion of these elections, and that is the real kind of geopolitical component of these elections.
Another contradiction which appears in Moldova, and maybe it also existed uh, in Romania some time ago when Liviu Dragnea was ruling, is that there is a cancellation of parties. They are not allowed to participate in the elections because of issues related to funding, illegal funding or dubious funding. There is a certain persecution of parties created by oligarch like Elon Shore. Of course, they are well based in certain legal arguments or even democratic arguments, but still, there are people who are unprivileged, as I understand, in Moldova, and they look for ways to express their discontent. So I think there is some contradiction here. The democratic aspect would mean that even people who are poor and maybe even sell their votes have their role in politics. And on the other hand, the government, which is pro-European, tries to limit the influence of this vote, which is, as I said, maybe is dependent somehow economically or politically on people who are dubious. And how is this issue resolved, and can it be resolved in a better way?
Well, the question that you're asking me is if I'll know the answer, I'll probably chair some department at some political institute somewhere in another country, and not be the journalist activist. In the sense that it's a very complex question. You're perfectly right that there is a huge tension here. Here, on the one hand, there is clearly dirty money coming to Moldova from we don't know from like we know that the country of origin is Russia, but nobody knows what this money are. Are these like Ilan Shore's money? Are this Russian state money? Is Ilan Shore like an actor that is trying to get into the Moldovan politics because he has his own agenda? Is he the spokesperson of some other interest? Is he being used by Russia to? So it's like it's a lot of things that are not clear till the end. What is clear is that they're really using a lot of money trying to buy the loyalty of various groups, and these groups, most of the people are. It's not only the poor. It's like we don't have a very clear picture of Shore electorate because it's a very eclectic group of people. It's sometimes it's poor people, sometimes it's people that, for example, minorities, especially ethnic minorities, that feel discriminated. It's youth from smaller towns and cities that lack any economic perspective, and because of this, Ilan Shore and his lucrative business of like organizing protests can provide some avenues, but also he gives them voice. He and to a large extent also Usate is trying to give voice to these people. So there is like beyond this issue of dirty money, there is really an issue of political representation. If you look at the list of deputies that have been elected, more than, I don't know, more than 50%, around like 60 and something percent, are from Chisinau, are living in Chisinau, which leaves like basically more than half of the country unrepresented. When you look at the groups, like who represents agriculturers, who represents like small farmers, like like people that are doing subsistence, the teachers, and so on and so on. So it's like really there is a beyond this kind of issue of dirty money, which is very serious, but which also is being sometimes abused. Where like it's a very ironical and in a way complex not complex but ridiculous situation where the state is asking us to believe or to trust it that these people are bad. So the police is kind of trying to investigate these crimes, but it's never more than several videos on YouTube. And then the police says like we're investigating it, but it's not clear. Then these things are going into courts and sometimes they're overturned. So there is like, even if this threat is real, and I'm talking now about the dirty money, there is not enough responsibility and seriousness, I would say, from the state. uh, and this and in this way it's not convincing that the extent of this phenomenon is as large as the police and the politicians, especially from past, claim. But then, like, let's go to the other issue, which is like also very important. I would say when it's more important and against, like, for which you cannot do almost anything because you can stop the illegal flows of money, and they're trying to stop it. But it's very difficult to create representation where there are no avenues for that, where there are no political forces that will represent these groups, and there is like really a very huge problem here. It's yes, there are people that sell their voices, sell their votes, which is kind of also, we're joking with our friends, it's kind of also very interesting and ironical that we're living in a world, in a capitalistic world, where everything is supposed to be sold and bought but the vote. There is this thing that the state doesn't care where you live, if you have a house or not, if you are healthy or not. You have to pay for a lot of things. Basically, an operation can cost you tens of thousands of euros if it's something very complicated. So the state doesn't act in terms of like creating this infrastructure where you could exercise the right to your health or the right to your environment. But the state is very careful about you not being able to sell your vote. And there is like the real problems of lack of representation for a lot of groups, and a lot of groups are using Shor's party or like Vasily Kostyuk, this new political party that entered into parliament. They're using other parties as a channel for their voices, and I think this persistence of like Shore in Moldovan politics is not only due to the money, but also due to the fact that there is like a constant misrepresentation or lack of representation for some other groups, which are increasingly becoming larger and larger. I think that was, in a way, the idea behind this geopolitical kind of consensus proposed by PAS. They realized that besides geopolitics, which is kind of very broadly defined, they cannot offer anything that would unite a lot of groups that otherwise will feel unrepresented.
Another contradiction, which is also interesting, is that Maya Sandu literally says Europe that is me, l'Europa c'est moi, if I can speak French. And that theoretically means that Europe stands for liberal democracy, for civic values, transformation, economic development, etc. But on the other hand, she really applies some tough measures during elections or generally against this continuous Russian hybrid war. So, how is this, on one hand, pro European attitude uh, and European also in means, which means should mean values, not only geopolitics, coexisting with the fact that there is a hybrid war with what is called Russia?
Uh, I think there is no, like, in your question you have used many of the terms that are really very much used and abused in our current discourse, our current political discourse, which are very, very fluid and which are being instrumentalized. I don't understand, for example, what pro-European means, really. Like, what is Europe and pro-European means? But it became this catch-all kind of political concept in which pro-Europe means somehow pro-European Union, not pro some values. Values are secondary. And then you have like this thing with Macron, Merz, and others, von Leyen, expressing strong support for Maya Sandu, which means with pro-European values not very much defined, they're fluid, and like it means like if Macron recognizes you as pro-European, then you are pro-European, regardless of the fact that do you identify or are you like loyal to some values that are kind of considered pro-European. Or I think in Moldova there are several things. The so-called EU integration was decoupled in a way from democracy. I was making this argument in fact that they're going in different direction. Moldova is advancing on its European path, but also Moldova is becoming a soft author. Like there is a form of soft authoritarianism implemented in the country. So I would argue that it's perfectly possible to be both authoritarian and pro-European, where pro-European doesn't mean, I don't know, any adherence or loyalty or like believe in some liberal values, but basically being approved by Brussels, which is now happening. Like Maya Sandu and all her policies are being approved by people that are leading now the EU. And at the same time, it's also perfectly coherent that she is using these increasingly authoritarian methods where there arbitrary sanctions to some Moldovan citizens without like that's been a big problem. Like Moldova imposing sanctions on its own citizens, not according to some legal procedure, but because they are figuring in other countries' sanctions lists, or televisions being closed because they're supposedly associated with shore, but again without legal due process. And in this sense, like the contradiction is being suspended by the fact that they're decoupled. No, like maybe some naive people think that like Europe means more democracy. In this iteration in Moldova, Europe means just like sometimes a very problematic form of anti-Russianism or Russophobia, which is not which is also translated politically as a kind of I don't know. Uh, the war in Ukraine has done a lot of damage in the sense that it has amplified this feeling of we're living exceptional times. Democracy is a luxury. I think it's also related to the COVID. COVID also was kind of a moment where the states started to like this kind of rules of exception. So in many ways, in Moldova, the rhetoric is like really we're on almost on the front line. What separates us from Russia is just the brave Ukrainian army, but we are acting as if we're in this war situation. And because of this, a lot of things can be suspended, like various freedoms, liberties. And regarding the fact that Maya Sandu is identifying herself with EU and kind of Europe is me, l'Europe c'est moi, it's kind of I don't know. I don't want to say that this is a characteristic of Moldovan mentality because I hate this kind of discussion about mentalities. But I think there is like it is inherent in many ways in modern politics, the personalization of everything in the era of social media, of like personalities, social media persons. I think it's not totally antithetic, or I don't know, it's not surprising to see personalities, people being put in front of movements, and like we're discussing people and personalities instead of ideas. But there is also some other things, like for example the very simple truth that the whole PAS party basically resides and basically survives on the image of Maya Sandu. And to a large extent, like this sentence, Europe is me, should be translated, I am PAS, and PAS is Europe, and Europe is me. So it's basically connecting PAS and the destiny of political party PAS with Maya Sandu. Maya Sandu is the only recognizable person from the party that the party has. So I think it's also this. They like PAS could not do they're not a normal political party. They're a very traditional political party that depends on the image of the leader. There is no second or third person in the party that would, I don't know, would enjoy some, at least half of the popularity that Maya Sandu is enjoying. But now for them, there is a big problem because Maya Sandu was re-elected last year, and basically if she doesn't go the Putin way, which I hope very much that she will not go, this mandate is her last mandate, and that puts a lot of problems for PAS. So in this sense, this mandate of theirs would be very new, with new challenges and new problems, because the biggest problem is how the party, how it will survive beyond Maya Sandu. Maya Sandu will not be the president at the next parliamentary elections, unless, I don't know, are there snap elections, but since PAS can rule comfortably, I don't envision that there will be such elections. So, like, how the party will succeed to be the most popular or to keep the power without Maya Sandu having the presidency and all the kind of the instruments of power associated with the presidency, and also with Maya Sandu already kind of having as a horizon, she could be probably the prime minister, but it's a lower position and it's different. And again, it will be a kind of a demotion. So I think I think the way you phrased this is a very good way, but also it in a way signals both the advantage or the way PAS was building their political campaign, but also it signals where the major problems will be. Because if Maya Sandu is not here, I don't know if within this next 3-4 years the party will succeed to grow a leader. Like there is like this way, Maya Sandu is very typical representative of Moldovan politicians. There is like, as we say, there is like they throw such a shadow around them that nothing grows. There is no kind of future generation in the party that so it's really also a very interesting situation from this point of view.
Um, Maya Sandu and PAS are lauded for the judicial reform which they have been implementing for some years. What is your own assessment of the judicial reform, its results, its effects?
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert, so my opinion is very kind of how to put it, superficial, in the sense that I'm informing myself about the results of this justice reform based on reports in the media, what I read about like various studies about media scandals. But I'm not like, I was not involved, for example, as a lawyer or whatever. So I don't know if it works from the inside. I have heard kind of ambiguous reports about this. uh, like on a very superficial and very general level, it seems that this reform has failed because it was not clear what its aim is. I think as they branded it, like making justice independent, I think it's an aim or a goal that doesn't doesn't help them, and it's not their goal. I think it's doesn't suit them. Yeah, I was looking for this word. I think most of Moldovan political parties would like a justice that would be very tolerant with them, with the power, and will be very intolerant with the opposition, and a justice sector that will take counsels, advices. I don't say directly orders because I don't have proof of that from the ruling party. And in this sense, there is a confusion or there is a tension within this kind of concept of independent justice. Like what type of independence? Independence in general. I don't think they wanted that. They wanted to have a justice which would be more reliable. And to be honest, I think the result is very ambiguous. On the one hand, or like they succeeded to make a semi-independent, mostly dependent justice. Like they created this situation in which some mechanisms were put in place. This vetting mechanism, where like the judges, the prosecutors, would be put through a process in which their wealth, their integrity is being assessed. And there have been some good results of this, but there have been also very dubious people that passed this procedure, which then threw a very bad light on the whole process, that characterized it as biased and so on and so forth. They came with the promise that they will fight corruption, and they created, like, they wanted to consolidate two institutions to fight corruption, and one for the petty crime and the other one is for political corruption. And the one that was fighting big political corruption was kind of weakened and almost decapitated, like the president, or like I don't know what is the prosecutor chief of this institution, was removed from the office when she started to threaten people, from not to threaten in the sense of, like, when she started to pursue or to do cases related to the ruling party. So in this sense, they didn't, I think it was clear of a signal that they are interested in a police, in a prosecutor office, in a judicial system in general, that would be listening to their commands. So of course, uh, they didn't succeed to do that completely, but the system is pretty much now kind of listening to them and kind of following their orders. And you see that, like, for example, all the anti-corruption campaigns are only related to the opposition, as if only the opposition is corrupt. And I think related to that, they still say that they will do more reform. I don't understand what it means. They'll do more justice reform. So I don't know what is the end goal of this. I hope that they will not succeed to. There are signs that there is some little independence and some decisions, but on big decisions, like the justice sector is very much aligned with the ruling party. So if that was their explicit, if that kind of hidden goal of the reform, they succeeded. If the reform was to build uh, a just justice sector, to put it this way, so I think it's a failure.
Another very Moldovan contradiction is the one between, let's say, Chisinau or the central zones of the country and southern Moldova, where Bulgarians and Gagauzians tend to vote against PAS. And we saw that during the referendum on the accession to the European Union, Bulgarians and Gagauzians voted against the European Union. Um, so there is this theory that they are against the European Union, but there is also theory that they wanted to punish Maya Sandu and to show difference from what Maya Sandu does. So, in other words, uh, how is this accession to the EU going to unfold with regards to the minorities? We see that there is European Union is popular among Romanian-speaking Moldovans. Maybe among Russian-speaking Moldovans, it's different attitude, but there must be also some way for them to be integrated in the European Union. So there must be also pro-European politicians who are coming from their circles, right?
Yeah, how to put it? The when like European integration, besides this very technical aspect of it, which means like adopting new laws and regulations, this and that, doesn't have really kind of a content in itself. So the content in Moldova is the local content, and various political, ethnic, religious, and so on groups, they put their content in that process. They associate it with it. In many ways, it means, I would qualify it as a localization of the so-called European integration process. To give you an example, for many, only because European integration is being perceived, for example, as getting much closer with Romania, there is a large group of there is a group of Moldovan unionists, like pro-Romanians, that they are supporting EU. So for them, one of the things that makes EU closer is the fact that it provides opportunities to be closer to Romania. On the other hand, and the same is with other groups, they put their content, and sometimes this content doesn't reflect the some true essence or some, I don't know, substance, real substance of the process, but it reflects fears. It reflects also incapacities, local realities, local memories, local even memories about things that have happened decades ago. So the process is very local, and the kind of the content of it, I would repeat it, is very local. Now there is really, on the one hand, this huge thing, which is like kind of EU can promise better policies for minorities and protection for national minorities that the Moldovan state does. So to a large extent, you would expect that national minorities would be interested in joining EU. But then there is this Moldovan reality that the process being mediated through the local context. I think, for example, that I don't want now to do a whole history of Gagauzians and Bulgarians and their attitude towards Chisinau, but let's say that they were very like there were all the conditions in at the end of the 80s, like with the start of perestroika and Gorbachev, sorry. I started already to speak other language. Yeah, so there were all the conditions were there for these groups like Moldovans, but also Gagauz and Bulgarians who were marginalized in the Soviet Union. Like there was no Bulgarian newspaper in Moldova, in Taraklia, or there was no Gagauz newspaper in Comrade. Everything was in Russian, and Moldovans also felt marginalized. That could have been a very nice starting point for building something that would resemble kind of an European acceptation of diversity or so on and so forth. Instead of that, the movements turned nationalistic, and that affected the memory and the interpretation of what followed further. And you have, like, again, the history is more complicated, but only going back you could understand some paradoxes. For example, as I said, the fact that somehow Russia became the defender of or Russia is being perceived as Russia, who has, like, the Soviet Union, who has like marginalized the Gagauz and the Bulgarians in the Soviet Union, is being perceived as the guarantor of minority rights against the nationalists in Chisinau. And I think the votes at the referendum, the way the Gagauzia votes usually, they don't vote against European integration as a process. They vote against pro-European politics, which is being promoted in Chisinau, which is very contradictory also, like the so-called European politics, because pro-European politics, because we mentioned before, on the one hand, there is like this kind of pro-European politics, on the other hand, which is supposed to be about values, democracy. On the other hand, you have like these authoritarian practices. On the one hand, you have these discourses about EU being the home of many nations. On the other hand, you have in Chisinau, including in the PAS party, you have like people that are emitting a very, very nationalist, sometimes quasi-fascist, or like very authoritarian discourse, and very discourse that is negating the right of the national minorities to use their language in their schools, and or discourses aimed, or they claim that they will try to Romanize everyone. And this kind of in its turn, this kind of creates other feelings in Tiraspol, in Taraklia. So I think these votes should not be thought as kind of the attitude towards kind of, I don't know what this Europe means, but like, let's say towards Europe, but it means its local kind of histories intertwined, because there were times when, for example, Gagauzia usually vote pro-Russian. That's kind of the rule, because they're first afraid of the nationalists in Chisinau, which they associate, for them, it's a continuity between 1990, where there was a huge march of volunteers from Chisinau to beat the Gagauz and Bulgarians because they wanted autonomy. So there was like almost we had almost another civil war in the country. It would stop in the last moment, which is like very good. But then like the scars of this are still today. So I think this local history explains the attitude towards various voting and electoral processes. And Maya Sandu, it really is like not Maya Sandu herself, but like PAS and this governance has not done a lot to try to bring Gagauzians closer because they were caught in this Russophobic rhetoric, which on the one hand is kind of understandable given the regional context and the war and the fears that Russia, if Ukraine falls, Moldova might be the next target. But on the other hand, this Russophobia also is being translated in Gagauzia as a kind of another proof that Moldovans are nationalists, and on the first occasion they will try to force everyone to learn Romanian and to forget their culture. So I think more delicacy is needed, more dialogue is needed, more platforms where the parties where like Gagauz and Bulgarians are being reintegrated in the country and being treated as citizens, but not as guests, not as like the agents of someone. Unfortunately, Moldovan state really doesn't do enough for this. Most of the processes that are aimed at confidence building between various minority groups in Moldova are being paid or being supported by international donors, which gives you a perspective that the Moldovan state is not as much interested in it. In the last years, they have been, if you read the Moldovan news, you'll read that people are claiming like in the last years there have been some large infrastructure projects in Gagauzia, like they built a new highway around Comrade. And then there is this kind of, I don't know, I call it magic thinking. They're thinking that only because of this road, somehow the local population should change its attitude towards Kyiv. It doesn't work like that, and I think this reflects also the lack of imagination of the Moldovan state to work on its relationship with the minorities, to give them guarantees that things will be democratic, that they'll be able to express themselves, to keep their identity, to develop it, and so on. So I think it reflects internal Moldovan problems, not the fact that, I don't know, like Gagauzians are like inherently against European integration or whatever. But unfortunately, when the state lacks both imagination and patience, it's easier to say like the Gagauzians are, for example, agents of Putin, and Bulgarians are also some brainwashed people that vote for Russia instead of voting for their interest. But we know that people might not vote for their interest because their vote is being distorted because of this very sophisticated, complex, sensible, and at times tragic local context.
You wrote a prolific article on 26th of September about the Moldovan politics, and in fact, it is the reason this article is the reason why I asked you for this interview. You wrote there various criticisms of what we discussed already, this geopolitical polarization or the authoritarian tendencies of the government, etc. And at the end, towards the end, you discussed that there is certain need for bridges, and in fact, this continuous polarization at every elections, this fear mongering, uh, destroys what various activists maybe try to do on the ground. And here is something I want to ask about. Uh, it looks like your thesis is, as I understand it, the citizen, the Moldovan citizen, uh, the Moldovan subject of modernity, if you wish, if we speak sociologically, has to be strengthened. And this polarization keeps him somehow weakened. You even write that elections give too much power to parties. There should be dehegemonization of parties in Moldova, and I read that also as strengthening in parallel of the citizen. So how could this strengthening of the citizen, how could this bridging between all these polarizations and differences, center, periphery, minorities, majority, west, east, etc., how could that be overcome? Are there examples of successful overcoming of these contradictions and really building of something, some interconnectedness among Moldovans?
Wow. Another very, very sophisticated, very complex question, which cannot be answered very easily. I would say, of course, I should make some disclaimers. One of them is when I'm talking about the polarization, I'm not talking from the point of view where, for example, you value like lack of conflict. And I have in mind some kind of naive harmony between groups and so on. I think that political conflicts are inherent, and they should we shouldn't be afraid. They should be, and they are part of the legitimate political process. It's the way in which groups express their interests, they confront them, they reach decisions, they convince other groups. At least this is how it should work, and how it works in like the liberal kind of democratic understanding of like the political process. So in this sense, when I'm speaking about polarization, it's not that I'm afraid and I want really a situation where there are no conflicts, and somehow there was this Soviet animation movie with the cat Leopold, whose remark was always, let's live in a friendly manner. Давайте жить дружно. It's not about this. It's about something deeper. And I think when I'm saying polarization, it's not just any political conflict, but it's like it's um, it's a political conflict that on the one hand doesn't reflect the reality, but it's being fed, and like all, as I said earlier, all other things are being thrown there, like social policies, discussions about economic policies and so on, are being fed into this kind of geopolitical conflict. And this, because it has little release, it has little in terms of like let's act on it, it's very only emotional, which again, I'm not saying that politics should be only rational, it's emotional. But besides emotional, there is nothing about like Russian integration or European integration. It's not a call to action, because it's really like that. So because of this, it and also because this at the its end, or in turn, employs a language of friends and enemies, and it kind of erodes anything that we're sharing. So in this sense, I think that this is dangerous to the Moldovan democracy. And I was mentioning in the article, because I'm part of a network of organizations and initiatives called Moldova for Peace, and we were involved from the beginning with this refugee effort. We're trying first to provide, and we're still providing food, hygiene stuff, but also we're trying now to, since several years, since 2 years at least, we're trying to do social cohesion. And we see how difficult it is to do these social cohesion efforts, how difficult it is to basically overcome decades of fear mongering, of stereotypes being had, of people not knowing each other, on people having bad experiences somewhere, sometime in Kiev, and then like hating Ukrainians for that. Like how difficult it is. For example, at our like in our organization, we have Russians and Ukrainians working together, and it's like really a very sensible process in which we're trying to create these bridges, like doing stuff together. We're having some workshops about like confronting the traumatic past, and let's go beyond this past. So you're doing this, and then with the occasion of the elections, you see like basically all these processes being almost thrown, I don't know, behind or throwing away, because some politicians decided that exploiting these feelings that we are trying to help people to put aside, we're trying to find the things that unites them or that are shared. And then there's politicians that say like, yeah, but I remember, for example, last year in the presidential elections, the some very prominent bloggers from PAS, in the second round, when Stoyanoglu, the Gagauz candidate, got into the second round, they were calling like, but how can we afford, how can we allow a Turk, an Ottoman, to get the presidency of Moldova? We're a country where like we were constantly fighting the Ottomans, and it's things like that. They're destroying whatever you built, and you built slowly. You built from like, it's really difficult. It takes time, and then because the political sphere is this sphere where with a lot of power, with a lot of influence, with like really powerful mechanisms in terms of media diffusion, you see all these efforts kind of being thrown out just because the ruling party wants to kind of get reelected, and of course they want to keep the groups kind of one pitted against each other. Although in meantime, like after the elections, they would say like we're actually now looking for social cohesion and building social cohesion. So there is this reality. uh, how to overcome it? I don't think you're right that basically at the center of the this Moldovan, I call it soft authoritarianism, and I'm being polite, but at the center is basically the president or the political class exerting power and some very privileged groups um, getting access to power, and a lot of people being, on the one hand, unrepresented, on the other hand, dispossessed. And the ordinary Moldovan citizen, except on social media, he doesn't have many political democratic avenues to express his opinion or like to participate. The level of development of local democracy is really, really very low. People are not discussing, are not invited, or there is no infrastructure for people's participation in, for example, in the local budget at the village level. And then if you move further and further, you see this exclusion being amplified to the extent that NGOs that are monitoring the transparency and the participation in the decision making process were evaluating that around half of the laws adopted by the parliament were like presented in the day when they were adopted. They were not discussed. They were not. There was no public participation. So in this sense, in this supposedly pro-European, very democratic in theory system, the ordinary Moldovan citizen doesn't have very much power to influence things, to participate. His voice is not heard. And then you have like as a consequence all these things that we're discussing about misrepresentation, about like various social media people capturing these voices and pretending they're representatives. So there is no easy solution on how to overcome these divisions, on how to build bridges. I think it's what is needed is really kind of a consensus among politicians. But again, I don't want to sound now too naive, like I've laid out the problems and now I'm waiting for the politicians that are the cause of the problems somehow to realize that this is problematic and to change. But it's also, we need also to change the way, in a way, the politics is being done. And this is why we at Platform are trying to avoid, and we're trying to promote a discussion of social policies in terms of social policies and avoiding geopolitics and that and that. So we need this change, and we need, of course, a lot of other things from that are happening at the grassroots level also, but things are not happening. And then I mentioned in the article that basically what's the biggest problem in a way, and I was joking about like this, let's save the country, but I think the country of course needs to be saved because it's in a very precarious and a very dangerous and very, how to put it, yeah, it's a very problematic situation. Really, the country needs some very urgent measures. So, for example, the population decline. It's like the census. The last census in 2024 showed that we are like 2 million and something out of 4 and something in the Soviet times. In 30 years, we have lost almost half of the population, and there is like migration, but also aging population, and that's really a problem that needs to be solved. And like, yeah, let's save the country. Let's think about that. Let's think about the fact that the economic growth is almost non-existent. Let's think about this. And in this sense, the country to a large extent needs to be saved, but not this. So we need to have these discussions. They're not happening. And to go a little bit back, I said that the biggest tragedy of this country is that basically most of its population is living outside the state. So I don't think, if like, this is why I'm saying that it's we need more than politicians starting to paying attention to social cohesion. We need to really reinvent the country, because of the way the economics of the country works, like based on the remittances, based on trade, based on people working abroad and sending money. All these people they're excluded. They live outside of the country. They live outside of the state as something. They live outside the political system. For them, the interaction with the state is like very summary. It's like very simplistic and very rare, like 3-4 times during their lives, like school, health systems, and so on. But otherwise, they living totally outside the state. They don't expect anything from this state. And as a corollary to that, I think it's the other problem that will haunt us in the decades to come, probably, is this thing that nobody believes in the potential and in the success of any collective action. We're very individualistic. Everything is being thought in terms of like individual success or failure, and that's also kind of a barrier in establishing further whatever you want to do. You need to overcome this. So of course, with a government, with a ruling class of the country being more interested in creating social cohesion, creating more powerful citizenry, they would be efforts to do. They would be like there are solutions in a way, like citizen assemblies, like really trying to involve people at the local level in the decision making process. But this is not happening, and I don't think that it will happen. What you have now in Moldova is basically various small groups at the grassroots level, like so-called civil society, both NGOs but also outside NGOs, trying to do this, and then there is a large mass of totally uninterested people that live outside the state, and then there is the state that is kind of using this fears, or like this state is being ruled by a political class that is totally not interested to build anything for with longer perspective. So it's, yeah, I think that's a description of the situation that would sound very much like being very dramatic and very kind of catastrophic to a large extent. And this is my reading of the situation. But the discussions that we're having to save the situation, to somehow improve it, are not reflecting this at all. They are like totally in another direction.
Okay, let us end this very interesting discussion with a return to the near past. Some time ago, there were anti-oligarchical protests in Chisinau, and certain social movement appeared, which was called Occupy Guguța, after a cafe at the center of Chisinau. You were involved in this movement. It was also associated with Platforma, as far as I remember. Could you tell us what were, how did this movement appear? What did it manage to do? What happened with this movement, etc.?
Yeah, I should do first. First, I should mention that the movement was not associated with Platforma. Platforma was just the media voice that, or like the media platform that was providing platform. Otherwise, we were just participants with many other groups, initiatives, and activists. Basically, the I was part of the build up to this movement because it was around this cafeteria called Cafenea Guguța in Romanian, which is a former Soviet cafeteria in the central park of Chisinau. I started to get involved in this case since 2014, and there was a long process in which, like, basically the most powerful person in the country back then, Vladimir Plahotniuc, wanted to he privatized the building illegally, in my view, but privatized the building, wanted to demolish it, and to build a huge hotel. That was the first thing that he wanted to build, and this is in the central park in Chisinau. And there were a group of activists that started to monitor the case. We started to write, to ask for public debates, public consultations. And there was another thing that was happening parallel to that, a case in the courts. We're following that also, writing about the case. And then around 2018, there was this confluence of several combined, I don't know, influence of several factors. We were still busy with fighting this building, with fighting for the fate of this building. But also in 2018 in Chisinau, there were local elections, and Andrei Năstase won these elections. But the then oligarch Vlad Plahotniuc, for various reasons, did not want to recognize the elections in Chisinau, so they canceled the result of the elections. And that brought a lot of people in the streets. So there was this confluence of various protests, and then the court took a decision about this building, about Cafenea Guguța, which was very negative, basically allowing the oligarch, like allowing Plahotniuc to basically demolish it and do what he wants. And there was this feeling that all these are connected. He canceled the results in Chisinau. He wants to build this in the central park and proceeds with that. And there was this discontent, and we started together, like various groups. We started together in front of the cafeteria, and meanwhile there were other protests in Chisinau. Like politicians or political parties were protesting, but we're doing also our own protest related to the building first, but also it became a kind of, the whole thing became a platform for, we were a political movement, because it was clear for everyone that it's not only about this building, it's about many other things. It's about how the justice sector is working for rich and powerful people, and it's not working for the public interest. It's about the corruption. It's about citizens not being asked, not being involved in the decision making process. And we started to do various stuff. It was basically an activist artist movement. We tried this movement to be a platform for politicization of the people, political education, but also political actions in terms of like solidarity and so on and so forth. So we survived. We functioned for around 1 year and something, more than 1 year, uh, until 2019. And then in 2019, after we had elections in February, there was this three big parties, like the Democratic Party of the oligarch Plahotniuc, the Socialist Party, and the Acum bloc, like Maia Sandu, PAS, and the former candidate for these cancelled local elections. In June 2019, after we call it the revolution of the ambassadors, after an action by the Russian ambassador, EU ambassador, and American ambassador, Plahotniuc was removed and he fled the country. He now returned in chains. He's in prison, so just before the elections. But yeah, he fled the country, and the socialists and this pro-European started to govern together. And we said, like, basically we as a movement have achieved our goals. We succeeded to kick off the oligarch. Of course, it was not our thing, but we're saying that it's also we had a contribution. The cafeteria was solved and the movement self-dissolved itself. There was this feeling that we're at a threshold. On the one hand, the main factor driving us together, the oligarch, was not there. So basically, we had nominally a democratic official governance, not a governance by bandits. At the same time, also a lot of thinking was put into like what we're doing next. Will we do the same protests, like trying to be creative or whatever, artists protesting things for the next years, or maybe we should move further, like to do a step further and, for example, build a political movement, a party or whatever. And of course, the results like of these internal debates were that we're not ready to commit to do a party. So we decided that the best kind of solution is to dissolve ourselves. But of course, now Occupy Goods is just a page on Facebook with little updates. But Occupy Goods was a school for political and civic education, I would say. And a lot of people that have participated in that movement were later participating in like mobilizations around COVID when we were trying to build a voluntary kind of civic movement that would help. I forgot what was called then, but like the essential groups, people that were from these groups that needed special attention and special care. At one point, we were part of, with people from Occupy Guguț, we were part of a group that was helping the homeless people in Chisinau. Then, when the war started, the same kind of, or like mostly people from this group from Occupy Guguț were involved in the refugee crisis. That experience taught us a lot of stuff, like how to, of course, from basic stuff like working with the police, but also how to build public discourse, how to participate in public debates, how to mobilize people, how to run various campaigns. So it was a school of political education, which is a dear memory to us. It doesn't exist anymore, and maybe it's for good. There is no one from the movement that say like that puts this as in their CV to get jobs or whatever. Some people from the movement uh, went into politics, but yeah, mostly the legacy of the movement is ambiguous now because on the one hand we have succeeded to protect this building and it's still there. The big hotel that the oligarch wanted was not built. On the other hand, another of our demands or our desires was to bring this building into the public kind of circuit, and we didn't succeed like to force the state, the local authorities, or at the national level to buy the building and I don't know, do there something, a civic hub or whatever, a school, or just like something that would be of use to anyone. So in this sense, it's kind of ambiguous. But as I say, it's kind of, it was a very nice and very significant moment in my experience, for example, and a lot of people's experiences. It was probably the first political community that was really explicitly acting and living politically. We're trying to reinvent everything from the ways in which we are self-organizing ourselves. We're like very much into horizontality, also employing things like from parecon, from participatory economics, understanding that the division of roles within the collective should be such that we don't have prestige jobs or functions and non-prestige and the same people. So we're rotating, we're trying to make everyone kind of be also recognizable, to be leaderless, to confront issues such as sexism, such as authoritarianism. So it was a very nice small situation of exception that I lived through together with other people.
Okay, we were speaking for more than an hour about the weakened Moldovan citizen and about a number of social difficulties. And I wanted to end with certain question related to you and the country. Where do you find energy and hope personally to continue what you do on a number of fronts and what we discussed? and where is the hope for Moldova?
Wow. Wow. Well, I just like what I do. I think my political kind of trajectory, my political education, and my political allegiance taught me, like, I'm an anarcho syndicalist. I would call myself this way. Uh, Kind of brings me to the point where I understand that politics is constant struggle. You could say it's class struggle, you could say, but it's a constant struggle. I don't have to expect something from just like happening by itself. This is the one thing, as a sociologist, which I'm sociologist by training. I understand the social change takes time, so I think it's also very important. Also, my experience in like Occupy Goods and other movements showed me how difficult it is to build durable, sustainable movements. It's not like it's probably easy to do groups around media persons, but these are not political parties. So I understood that really in a context where, and this is why I'm saying that nobody, like in Moldova, very few people believe in collective action. Like in this very hyper individualized society, like just working together, doing things together, it's sometimes an achievement. Like nobody teaches us how to do that. I'm always saying that we need another political education in schools and everywhere, because we are basically taught how to compete with each other, but not to work together, not to cooperate. And if you put this, you understand that like things require, on the one hand, a lot of patience, deliberate effort, and with the understanding that things will take time. So I'm like my hope is like my power, my energy, or whatever is coming from the fact that it will not be overnight. And I've seen many too many instances of this, and I'm afraid of changes overnight. So like I know that durable change, the one that will last, is like really also difficult to build. As for Moldova, I don't have I don't have much hope in terms of like things will be bright and better or whatever, because I don't see a project oriented towards that. I don't see any discussion about like what Moldova could look like in 2050 into like in 2100, like 50 years from now, 70 years from now, 2 centuries from now. Even just this exercise of speculating. So uh, in this sense, I'm skeptical. But then I look around and I see a lot of other people. I see younger people. Maybe I'm too cynical also because of this transition of ours that has been really very complicated, very cynical, and very tragic. So because of this, I've seen in my life like countries collapsing and people changing overnight their convictions and so on. So this kind of also influenced me. So maybe I'm not the best building materials for utopian projects, but I see people coming, other generations younger than me, that are more inspired, more imaginative to a large extent, more believing in themselves, and I have some hope. I'm always saying that I'm optimistic long term, and I'm pessimistic like short term. So yeah, that I think I'll end here.